It is a bitter pill for me to swallow, but you can trust I am all too familiar with the accountability I need to accept for where we are in the Odyssey of Kings. First, I'm going to talk about our history. In the first era of the Game of Kings, the server ran by the name Atlantis RP in 2016 2017, and you could consider the game as close to official as a private server could be, where the admin was just as new to the game as any player. The server was here in beta and still stands today in Tencent's looming shadow. In late 2017, there began the first official season of the Game of Kings. The Exiled Codex began here, and the realm was in constant turmoil as players swarmed to rule the lands. This was a period where the server saw 40 plus players 24/7. It became clear that a server with this concept required more than the motto, get the crown, rule the realm, and took manpower to regulate. This was where the server owner brought in his first round of admins, and the objective was written in black and white. Wars were constant, politics were tense, but RP had little existence here. The next season came after the rule of Rathman, unfortunately found to be an admin playing the game under everybody's nose. While it was a fun time, the server went quiet shortly after the news was released about who Rathman really was. The admins in the season following were toxic. They were fun to play with, but they had no respect for the player, and they made it clear with insulting, opinionated, and disrespectful statements that we don't condone on our server administration in the present day. The era of the Night Queen followed the first season of the Game of Kings, when the heat died and players were given an objective separated into three groups: tribe, guild, house. I won't get into the details of the groups, but it's as simple as this. Collect a skeleton key and claim land with it. In return, the land resulted in a crown that the player was to keep safe on a T4 fighter thrall in their base. This was when I joined, as a player new to Conan Exiles. I joined in the middle of this season, already 2 months in, and not one faction claimed the crown. But when I joined as a house, which was a faction eligible for the crown. I settled my base, I grew my clan to 8 in 3 weeks from random players that would find me. Then there was the Night Legion, another faction that found themselves on top of a pillar, out of raidable reach, a clan of 7, following a single player driven to antagonize the server. RP was an important element in this season and was really fun, but PvP was the primary element, and few factions stood for long against the Night Legion. This season was so aggressive that once I challenged the Night Legion, they had already conquered 7 other factions, large ones. I was not experienced in PvP, I was a role player. And when I was ready to stand my ground against this faction, everyone was already dead. This season was so aggressive that once I challenged the Night Legion, by the time I had my chance, the role players of the server had uproared to the point that the leader of the Night Legion couldn't stand the complaints anymore. He threw his crown to the wind in Discord, and the season was swiftly shut down that day, and the server went dark for weeks. A month following, I went to the server owner personally and discussed the history of the server, as well as what went wrong in the era of the Night Queen and how we can bring it back. We spent 2 weeks, almost all hours of the day, compiling content for Discord, such as a 60-page rule set, FAQs, Discord channels for appropriate posts such as OOC, info, roleplay, and individual faction requirements, etc. The rules weren't the biggest bite to chew, but we needed to completely reconstruct the idea behind 3 groups and how they were implemented to play their part on the server. We launched the Glass Throne, and it took 2 weeks to pick up. The server was intriguing and players were at a steady population and growing, each player playing their part as a tribe, guild, or house. The glass throne was named in respect to the fragile balance of RP and PvP, to paint the idea that you could become the ruler, but also that you could fall even quicker. This was the most time-consuming season, where PvP events were held every Saturday. Over 12, some were even recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. This economy system worked. There was a market where players could sell mass goods for quantities of gold. There was PvP, and of course, tense politics. But one thing that we were constantly faced with was changing the rules to fix loopholes, exploits, and address vague outliers that players needed explained even further than we had already written it. This season fell flat on its face because role players could not handle themselves in a war, and PvP players could not handle themselves following the rules of engagement. OOC discussion erupted into a heated argument and resulted in player bans as well as conflict of interest. We recovered and the season continued. And shortly after, during our recovery, an admin from the first season returned, and instead of assisting as a returning admin, decided to investigate that once again there was an admin leading the scoreboard in the Game of Kings. It was a shock to me that I didn't see it first. Myself and another admin tried to de-escalate this player and even brought his nerves down to a discussion that would preserve the integrity of our community. Then argument escalated into insults between server owner and returning admin. The returning admin went to another player that was already dealing with conflict from the rogue admin, and they pulled everybody in our community to a private Discord and began spreading propaganda about the admin team as a whole. It was devastating, and I left shortly after. 2 to 3 months passed when I returned to the server owner to talk about what we can do to revitalize the Game of Kings with a new perspective. We decided that RP and PvP don't mix. It never will, and any server that promotes it is just as fucked as ours was in the past. We launched a new rule set, scrapping everything we did previously to begin an RP PvE server, revolving around a story of the Green Wall. This server failed to grow. Conan Exile's population was at its lowest, and PvE wasn't intriguing enough for all of the communities we advertised to. The season only saw a consistent 9 to 14 players for 4 weeks. We held events every week, but they were story driven, also recorded to be seen in our channel. It was at this point I decided with the owner that the season of the Savage Sword saga wasn't going anywhere. I took all of the players on our server and promised them that I would deliver an experience they deserved, even if it meant going to another server. This is where my eyes were opened to the private server community as a player. I reviewed over 20 different servers to play, from the most popular to the most interesting, and when we settled on one, we settled on it because it offered the element of RP and PvP and PvE. We went all in. We all settled, and when we were established as a guild involving ourselves as assassins, we seeked out conflict to help as agents from the darkness. 2 weeks passed and not a single fucking conflict to be found, only sexual tension between factions. That is because what the Conan Exiles RP community primarily consists of is a giant cesspool of erotic roleplayers. So after we wasted all of our time to find that this new RP PvP server was actually an RP PvP where only a few players were engaging, we found that the few players actually engaging were admin built. Stats, size, character, and items were fed to specific players to keep others in line. It was bullshit. So here we are. I returned once again, 3 months after that, to discuss how we can truly encapsulate the magic that we had in the era of the Night Queen. The Odyssey of Kings was revamped, but this time with a system that held players accountable for their progress, established clear and to the point rules of engagement, as well as a rule set that could be referenced to respond to any player that was not capable of reading them. While it may seem pedantic, I have been here long enough to see that this system we have provided cannot be found or enforced the way it is here anywhere else. You're welcome to take inspiration from this server and try it for yourselves, but I don't believe in its success. I say that egregiously because it is time to recognize that the player base that currently exists in Conan Exiles is separated into 3 categories: roleplay, player versus player, player versus environment. The roleplay community is built on the backs of private servers that run erotic roleplay mods to cater to the majority. The player versus player community has regressed into sticking to official servers, and while officials fucking suck and are covered in eyesores and griefing exploits, that is where PvP happens and is thriving. Player versus environment community can be found a bit within private servers listed, but those private servers are just as dead as ours was when we catered to that group. PvE players stick to officials as well, with the same disappointing exploits practiced in PvP. So here is the conclusion. To our server owner, and to you, my beautiful players, RP and PvP do not work together. They never will, as they never have. I unfortunately cannot continue to carry the weight of disagreements between these player groups, and even with rules of engagement as streamlined as ours could be, with my commitment to reciting them when needed, it is obvious to me now that these categories are separated for a reason. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but we've failed again to provide the environment that held up the magic that was once the era of the Night Queen. Our mistakes fall not only on the hardcore server settings, but the misconception that PvP could have rules. If you are here in our server for PvP, we welcome you, but you will not find it here. If you try, you will be berated and I will be pressured to ban you. If you are here in our server for RP, we welcome you, and you will find it here, but you will be conflicted by the threat of PvP groups as well as the harvest rates to build and defend, and bored of the engagements you lack because of our restrictions placed to mitigate metagaming, including the invisible player list, the hidden event log, and the names of players removed from the interactions outside of the chat log. If you are here in our server for PvE, we welcome you, and you will find it here, but it will be limited to the events once a month because our admin team is too busy handling the complaints between RP and PvP players. I hope that what I've said can be understood as an apology, and that my efforts were intended to cater to each and every player to join us. It's just that even with a rule set I intended to require minimum to 0 admin involvement, players are far too dependent on us to enjoy the game we've built over and over and over again. Thank you for joining the Odyssey of Kings.